Hey everybody, happy Friday, happy end of the week. I hope you had a great week. I hope you are ready for an awesome weekend. And we are going to be talking about PTSD and PTSD awareness, obviously, tonight. If you are having any audio issues, let me know in chat as soon as possible. And if at any time during the stream tonight you have questions, please throw them in caps. I will do my best to try to catch them. If this is your first time on the channel, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you. If you got anything of value out of this tonight, please consider subscribing or giving me a thumbs up or both. Really appreciate that. Sarge, this is a prepping channel. Why are we talking about this? Because of a few reasons, actually. So my primary job, many of my regulars here already know, is I am a trauma therapist, and specifically I work with first responders and their families. And good. Thank you so much. Appreciate the feedback on the audio. Thank you, Coffee First. So I'm a trauma therapist who's been in the field for a very long time. The dinosaurs were still walking the earth when I started in this field. And primarily I'm working with first responders and their families now. But if you are into preparedness, and that's normally what you come to my channel for, this is an important topic that we do periodically talk about here, about mental health first aid and topics like that, because in any kind of emergency situation, be it a small, short-term temporary or a really big SHTF situation, you are going to have people around you that are affected by it in a way that is going to change their mental health, often in dramatic ways. And you, in fact, maybe that as well. It may affect your mental health as well. I don't care how hard you think you are, how tough you think you are. I'll have these fantasies in prepper world of like, living alone in the woods and that kind of thing. I don't care how tough you are. I have worked with people who were Marines, some special forces, even some infantry, and of course, firefighters, police officers, EMTs, paramedics, corrections officers. These people are very, very tough people. If they can be affected by it, I assure you, you can as well. So this is something you definitely need to be aware of if you are at all into emergency preparedness as well. We have a couple little rules here on the channel. No sexism, no racism. My mods have complete freedom to kick anybody out of chat or put you in timeout. So please be respectful of that. And please also be respectful of the mods. They give their time freely. They are not paid mods. And we'll add another rule for tonight, just because, you just never know with a topic like this. If you are of the type of person who does not respect first responders, this may not be the channel for you. If you can't come with it with some respect, and if you're going to post things in chat or in comments like ACAB or things like that, you know what that means. There's no place for that on this stream. And if you post it in comments afterwards, you may be up for a little while, but I assure you I'm going to delete it. So don't even waste your time. But if you can be here, if you want to be here respectfully and learn a few things about trauma, you're more than welcome. I have in the description, I've got a course that I run through Vargold 3T on managing your fight, flight, freeze in emergencies. That is for everybody. That is whether you're into preparedness or you're a first responder or you're just somebody who's interested in mental health and you want to know a little bit about managing the fight, flight, freeze response in an emergency. The link for that is in the description down below. I also put it in the chat here up near the top. I also listed 3 books that I strongly recommend. One of them is The Body Keeps the Score. The second one is Getting Past Your Past. Now that one, Getting Past Your Past, I do recommend that that one's probably better suited for if you're actually doing some therapy with a trauma therapist, and especially if you're working with an EMDR trained therapist. Getting Past Your Past is a great book to work in conjunction with your own therapy that you're doing. And the last one is I Don't Want to Talk About It, which is specifically about male depression. I've been talking to you many, many times about how depression looks different in men. And even in my field, there's still a lot of ignorance about that. We need to keep spreading the word that it's going to look different with male patients often. And it has to do a lot of times with cultural norms and how we're raised as young men. So not going to get too much into that one tonight, but it's a good book. Definitely check that out. And those are all in the description down below with my affiliate link with Amazon affiliates. Two other quick announcements, or a couple other quick announcements. I am going to be guesting on a couple streams about mental health topics this coming week. And the first one will be on Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Pistol Packing Pilots channel. We're actually going to be talking about mental health as it relates to our pilots. So you definitely want to check that out. Got a link to him in the description down below. And then next Saturday, I'm going to be on Coffee First, Then Speak. She's actually in chat with us today. And we're going to be talking about things like trauma and anxiety. That will be next Saturday night. I believe we're starting at 6 p.m. And there's a link for her channel as well. Please make sure you check out these channels. And if you like what you see, give them a subscribe too. Definitely friends of my channel. I highly recommend them. All right, so we are going to talk specifically about PTSD today. And because I work with first responder population, I probably will use my experience through that. That's not to say that, like, obviously other people can get PTSD and it can look a little bit different. A lot of it's similar too, but that's the lens that I operate through. So that's that. A lot of my metaphors and anecdotes will be kind of speaking through that experience. Let me say, before we dig into this now, I want to say hi real quick to everybody in chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in tonight. And if you see me looking down, I'm just checking my notes. In fact, we might move them up here just to make it a little bit easier. I mean, so it's not so obvious that I'm doing this. Right. All right. Hey, everybody in chat. Let's say hi. I know I saw Coffee First, Then Speak. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Virginia Bushcrafters, always good to see you, my friend. How are you doing tonight? Cold War Prepper, good to see you, Lee. How are you doing? James, thank you for joining us. Lazarus Long. Steve, Corsair Trainers, always good to see you. Gus Wolf, 22 push-ups. Not me, not tonight. You can do them. You can do them. Yeah, so that's a whole nother topic. We do hit on that sometimes, but that's a good one to circle back to. Yeah, I agree. I agree. We're in a bad place with that. We may or may not get into that a little bit tonight. We'll see. T2, it's good to see you. Appreciate you. Yeah, no worries. If you got to go handle some stuff, I appreciate it. No problem. Yep. Loneliness and despair, and yeah, especially in solo situations. Absolutely. All right, so let's roll right along here. So PTSD, or specifically when you hear that, we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. And what that is it's a cluster of symptoms that people can get after exposure to trauma. And it can be as simple as one trauma, or it can be a sequence of traumas. And it can be what we would in the field would nickname a small t, meaning like little trauma. That even a little trauma can do that. And or it could be a big T, like a big trauma, something huge, like you witnessed somebody getting beheaded in front of you. That would be considered a big trauma. Or you're a victim of sexual assault. That would be considered a big T, right? So it could be either of those. It's hard to say. Let me get this right out of the way first. It's hard to say who's going to get symptoms from a trauma. So not every time a person is exposed to a trauma or a life or death situation where they're in fear for their life, or they witness somebody else that they're afraid for, it doesn't always lead to trauma symptoms. It's hard to determine. Like, so again, I told you I'm going to use first responder metaphors. Two firefighters can go into a burning building and start pulling bodies out. One person might be okay, and then the other person might feel kind of edgy about it. And then the next day he's kind of irritable, and then he's starting to have bad dreams about it. And then he's starting to maybe have flashbacks about it. And then he's getting reactive about certain things, right? Why did one get it and the other one not? It has nothing to do with strength. It has nothing to do with how hard a person is. So let's dispel that crap right now. It is not a sign of weakness to pick up trauma symptoms. What it does have to do with is, in my experience, again, speaking through the lens of population that I work with, is two factors seem to have a big play in this. One being if you've had previous trauma experience and it somehow relates to your current trauma experience, right? So it has to do a lot of times with how it makes you feel inside. And I'll explain why later on. Or sometimes it has to do like, does it smell like something? Literally talking about sense, smell. Does it look like something that you've already experienced, right? So that's one factor that can determine it. Another factor that can determine it has nothing to do with trauma at all. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a bad childhood or you were abused growing up or anything like that, really. It doesn't have to be that. Another factor that can play a role in whether or not a person might pick up trauma symptoms has to do with what we in the field call core beliefs. Okay, so your core beliefs are things that you were raised with, like the values, the norms, the traditions, your social culture, what is normal for you, right? So if I was to talk to a patient and he went into a scene, I'm going to make something up here, and he went into a scene, let's say I'm talking to one of my officers, and he went into a scene where a woman had gotten beat up really bad by her boyfriend, like really bad. And his partner comes away from that and he's like, man, that was a bad call. That poor lady, I hope she gets some help, that kind of thing. But he's okay. But this other guy, he's having a bad time with it now. He's having nightmares. He's having flashbacks. It's getting in his head. He's getting real irritable. He's getting reactive to situations. Maybe he starts drinking a little bit more to try to manage those symptoms. Well, maybe growing up, a value in his household, a core belief was you don't lay your hands on a woman. And maybe it was so instilled in him that like that was like this doesn't happen. It's not okay, right? So your core beliefs can be just as much a factor in determining whether or not you're going to pick up some trauma symptoms in a situation as anything else, right? So it's not always like that's another myth. Is like, oh, the person had childhood trauma, they were abused or whatever. Not necessarily. Can that be a factor? Yes, it can, but it's not necessarily always the factor. Okay, so keep those two things in mind. And the cluster of symptoms, we've already started talking about some of them. You can get nightmares, you can get flashbacks, you can get irritability, you can get reactive. When I say reactive, I mean like somebody sees something or hears something or experiences something and like they go from a 0 to a 10 real fast and can get very, very agitated and maybe even like a little bit hostile, just kind of depends on the person, kind of depends on their fight, flight, freeze mechanism and how that operates, things like that. Right. And there's some other symptoms you can get too. Avoidance is another one. Isolation. Like a lot of times people don't want to be around other people when they're having these symptoms. Maybe they're trying to cope with it themselves. Maybe they're afraid of like affecting other people around them. That's also very, very common with my first responders is they're afraid of like, if I talk about this, is it going to affect other people around me? Right. That's a very common one. Maybe they're avoiding different streets because they have bad memories go on certain streets, things like that. Right. So just some examples of some of the symptoms. Typically, it has to persist for more than a couple months, and it also has to not be accounted for by other diagnoses or substance abuse or something like that, right? Now, there's also minor versions of this too, which aren't PTSD, and there's a whole cluster of diagnoses where a person might show some of these symptoms, but they don't meet full criteria. Okay, we treat that at my place as well. Let me say hi to Chad again. I saw a few people popping in there. Wayne, it's good to see you. How are you doing? Bear with me here just a second. Doc Alt and Gus, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you. Scorpion Metals. Natural disasters absolutely can cause a person to pick up trauma symptoms. Absolutely. Did I freeze, guys? Okay, so it's just one person. Okay. All right. And again, as we go, smells definitely. Smells is a big one, and sounds can be. Yep. And a lot of people drink to manage their trauma. True. Sometimes it's marijuana, sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's other stuff. We're probably going to get into a little bit of that later on too. If you have questions as we go, put them in caps. I will try to stop periodically to check for that. If I miss your question and we go like way past it, just post it again. I apologize. I'll do the best that I can to keep up with that stuff. All right. Why does this happen in the brain? Well, it's complicated and I can't give you a full semester's worth of biology and anatomy and physiology in a 1 hour live stream, so I'm going to give you a Reader's Digest version, a very, very simplified version of this. So whenever we are in and I get into this in much more depth in that Vargold course that I was telling you about. So if you're interested in this, then you probably want to check that out, because I spend quite a bit of time on that, on like how it works in the brain and the body, what exactly is happening. So whenever we're in an emergency, our fight, flight, freeze is going to get activated. Now, your fight, flight, freeze is hard-coded into your brain, and it comes from that part of the brain back here, the brain stem, right? Which in my field, we sometimes call that the lizard brain. Don't worry about that. You don't have to know that. It's like the oldest part of our brain. It, going back to evolution, it's connected to like our Neanderthal ancestors and things like that. And interestingly enough, I just took a new training on this, talking about polyvagal theory. You don't have to worry about that. But in there, one of the things I learned was that freeze was actually the first response that got developed in what would later become the human brain and passed down through our evolution. So freeze developed because the predators at that time, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago, before Homo sapiens, so we're talking like our really primitive ancestors, the predators at that time mostly hunted by sight. So those who learned to freeze could survive an encounter and pass their DNA on. And so it went. And then the next one that developed was fight. And I'm sorry, I didn't write these dates down, like when exactly that developed, but many, many years later, fight developed as a possible response to emergencies. And that became one way that you could survive an encounter. And then many, many thousands of years later, as humans started to band together into little nomadic tribes and things like that, a fawn response, wait a minute, fight, flight, freeze. What am I missing? I'm sorry. Let me back up 1 second. I screwed that up. Fight and flight developed at the same time. And then came several thousand years later, fawn, which we don't talk about a whole lot, but fawn is basically trying to placate whatever is the threat, right? So if somebody was mugging you and you said, hey, I don't want any trouble, you can have my wallet, that's called fawn. And that's another emergency response that your brain can do. It's not typically talked about as much. You may, in the years coming, we may start to bring that into the equation. Just know that that's like the fourth one. So it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Typically, we talk about fight, flight, freeze. Okay. So that developed when humans became more nomadic and banding together, and started developing communication and social bonding and things like that. Okay. So the part of the brain that handles that starts in the amygdala, connects to other parts of the brain like the hypothalamus and the hippocampus and your vagus nerve system. And really it starts to affect your whole body. So what happens in an emergency situation is that part of the brain is literally going to take over. And your upper part of the brain, right, your higher functioning brain, your prefrontal cortex and things like that. I know I'm getting a little technical here, but the part of the brain that makes us like good logical thinkers and problem solvers, that kind of gets a back seat because now it's about survival. And so when that happens, you get super strong, super fast, more resilient to pain. Your brain's processing speed is like overclocked. So if you've ever had the experience in an emergency where it felt like things were in slow motion, what was happening was your brain was so overclocked that time is relative. Remember that, right? Time is relative. That's a concept from physics. Your brain was so overclocked that the outside world felt like it was in slow motion. It wasn't, but your brain is moving things faster and processing it much faster. Your side effects, your finite motor skills get kind of jacked up. You can pee your pants, you can poop your pants, you can throw up. And those come from, some of those come from the way the vagus nerves interact with the body. And it's a whole body response. It's, that's the best way I can explain it without spending a whole semester talking about this. Now, most of that is good because it's designed to keep you alive, right? It's designed to keep you alive. But the side effects of it are that after the emergency is passed, your brain stem is not fantastic about processing memories. And so it takes all that information and it sends it back up here to the higher brain, the upper brain, if you will. And it says, here you go. We survived. You know, and your upper brain says, whoa, that's a lot of data and we don't know what to do with this. This is crazy. Okay, so let's start sorting this crap out. Blood smells like copper. Let's put it over here. Gunshots, they kind of sound like fireworks. Let's put those over here. Fire, some burnt bodies smell like when you singe your hair, or sometimes if pork is overcooked. So let's put those over there, right? So this file gets like scattered all over the place, and your brain sorts like with like. And another way that it sorts it is, how did it make me feel inside? How did it make me feel? And that's during the trauma and after the trauma, and sometimes before the trauma, like right before the trauma, right? So it says, oh, okay, well, we felt like we were going to die. So that goes over here. With every other time in our life that we felt like we were going to die, or we felt like I should have fought harder. Well, that's going to go over here with every time we felt like we should have done more. Okay. So now we got a problem. Now we got a problem because it didn't get stored like a normal memory. Okay. It got stored as a trauma, and that's different than a bad memory. All right. I hope you're following so far. I'm trying to keep it not too technical. Then because of that, if it doesn't get to adaptive resolution, that's another technical term, but basically means when you go to sleep every night, your brain takes everything that happened during that day and it tries to form adaptive resolution, which means it sorts it, it files it. Maybe you were learning something new. Maybe you just had a happy memory today, or maybe you had this horrible trauma memory where you're pulling bodies out of a fire. Okay. And it tries to get to adaptive resolution. And if it does, in this case, it's going to get stored as a bad memory. If it doesn't get to adaptive resolution, then it gets stuck. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, think of the best way I can describe this for people is think of like the old internet when we had dial up. Those of us who are like old like me, and you remember you had to get an upload for Windows 98. And you turn it on and it would run all night long. And then you wake up in the morning and the file got to 70%. And then something happened. You disconnected and it didn't reach 100%. Well, that 100% in this case would be adaptive resolution. So if it doesn't get to adaptive resolution, guess what happens? It's going to keep trying, and it's going to keep trying, and it's going to keep trying, and it's going to keep trying. And guess how that manifests? It's going to be nightmares and flashbacks. It's going to intrude into your consciousness in other ways, and it's going to continue to do that until we get it to adaptive resolution. And then it might still continue to do it, but maybe less often and less intense. All right. I'm going to stop here, check your chat, see if I got questions. I'm going to scroll back a little bit here. Yeah, thank you, Lee, for the help there. I see you sharing some links and stuff. Yeah, it's so James, that's probably a good way to put it, because your fight, flight, freeze is hardwired in your DNA. So what you choose to do in an emergency is going to be different than what I choose to do in an emergency. Now, yes, you can train past that. And that's exactly what first responders and military do. This is why we have boot camp. They train them to not run. They train them to not freeze, right? Same thing with our first responders. So that's the point of like training and then overtraining and then training again. You can train past what your body's normal fight, flight, freeze is. And unfortunately, for those of us who aren't first responders, because I'm not, and I'm not a veteran as well, Sarge is just a nickname if you're brand new to the channel. For those of us who are not, you won't know until you need it. So it's probably a good idea if you're worried about this thing to kind of train on some of these things. Take some martial arts class and have some of those classes should be simulated. That, like, what would I do if I suddenly get attacked? What would I do if I walk into a room and I get jumped? What if it's 2 people? What if it's 3 people, right? And that's a good martial arts studio will do those things with you. And there's other ways that first aid, right? Like, so you can take first aid classes, and a really good first aid class is going to simulate what it's like to be an emergency. How do we do that? I used to be a CPR instructor. I unfortunately let my instructor license lapse. I will pick it back up at some point. But if you really want to train somebody, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you out of the room and I'm going to set up some first aid scenarios. You're going to walk in and then you're going to have to triage 3 people. One of them's got a really bad gash on his wrist. One of them's unconscious and not breathing. And one of them is got like a twisted ankle. And you're going to have to make split-second decisions. And meanwhile, I might stand behind you and start yelling, he's going to die. What are you going to do? Oh my God, somebody needs to call 911. And that's going to get your fight, flight, freeze a little bit jacked up. And we're going to see what happens. And then you can train past it. Okay. Hardcore training is the only way to overcome your natural response to fight, flight, freeze. If there's another way, I'd tell you. I don't know one. Yep, and those are the 4 right there. Exactly. I love it. That's a good one. Thank you, everybody, for joining in tonight. Appreciate y'all. Yeah, and that kind of gets into like the male depression thing that we were talking about before. And yes, adrenaline can be a drug that people can very much get addicted to. Some people love it. During that filing phase, do things occasionally get misfiled? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Things get put in the wrong places by your brain because, again, remember that lizard brain, the brain stem, it's not designed to store memories. That's not its function. Its function is to keep you alive. That storage of memories thing, that came in evolution later. That's up here. That's your upper brain. That's your, all this cortex stuff up here, your cerebellum and cerebrum. That's your upper brain stuff. That developed later on. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate the feedback. Yeah, it's like corrupted files, or sometimes I say, like, for those of you guys who understand computers well, like fragment of code that's just kind of hanging out there. It's kind of like that. Yes, all that is true. Yes, please get your CPR training. It's good to stay on top of that. I will get my instructor license back when I can square away some time for that. All right, I think I caught up everything. Again, if you have questions, throw them in caps so I can catch them. Let's keep going. All right, so that's your Reader's Digest version of like how it works in the brain, why it's happening. How do we fix it? Because it is treatable, and that's if you don't walk away with anything else tonight, if you don't remember anything else about this tonight, I want you to remember that if you or a loved one starts having any of these symptoms, that it is treatable, and our treatments are so much better than they were 30 years ago. So much better. We have made leaps and bounds thanks to a few things that I'm going to talk about tonight that have really been game changers. I have had people come in to me that were on the verge of self-harm, unaliving themselves, if you will, who are about to lose their family, their wife, their job. And we got their symptoms down so much that they wouldn't technically even register as PTSD anymore. Like, it's kind of, think of, poor metaphor, but I want you to think about it like this. A person can have HIV, and with the medications that are out there now, they can get their HIV markers so low that it's undetectable. PTSD, same thing. If you get PTSD, many people would say you have that for life. It's debatable because we can, for many people, get the symptoms so low that it's non-detectable, right? And even when that doesn't happen, even when I don't get somebody's symptoms all the way down to 0, often I can get it down to a very, very low manageable level. Yeah, I still get nightmares, but they're only once a month now. Yeah, I still get flashbacks, but they're only for a few seconds, and I know how to get myself out of them. So treatment is definitely helpful, and I'm going to give you different options here. That's coming up here in just a minute, actually. But the main thing is, if I was to break this down to like, what do all the different treatments have in common? The main thing is, as a trauma therapist, I want to get at that core thought, that stuck point, as we would call it, a stuck point of what's the cognition that's tied into this, that's keeping us from putting this puzzle piece together and storing it as a bad memory and achieving adaptive resolution, right? So I'll give you some examples of what that might look like. Let's change it up a little bit. Let's do a corrections officer, right? So let's say that I had a patient who was a corrections officer, and one day on shift, he witnessed one of his fellow COs get assaulted from behind, and his throat got cut, and he basically watched this guy bleed out, right? So now this CO might go home and he might start saying in his mind, if I had been paying attention, that wouldn't have happened. Okay. That's what I would call, as your therapist, that's a cognitive stuck point. And I would also say it's a cognitive distortion because it's absolutely BS. It's not true. So you have, in those situations, you've now created this schism, if you will, in your mind, and your subconscious. I know I'm trying not to get too technical here. Your subconscious is wrestling with it now, and your subconscious is saying, well, which is it? Was it my fault or was it not my fault? And so it's kind of wrestling with that, and that makes the symptoms really get worse, and that fragmentation of the memory gets worse. And the longer that goes on, the worse those symptoms are probably going to get. So as the therapist, where I'm going to try to find that thought, and in this case, the made up example I had was, well, if I'd been paying attention, this wouldn't have happened. And we're going to break that down, and we're going to do some Socratic questioning to it. Like, well, how would you know that would be any different, right? I assume this inmate had planned this out for a long time. If they saw you turning around, why wouldn't they have just waited until you turned back around again? Why wouldn't they have waited till you weren't walking with this other CO, right? So as you start to break it down, you realize it's BS. We attribute blame to ourselves sometimes for situations that we had nothing to do with. It's not our trauma to hold, right? This happens with my soldiers a lot, right? So my soldiers will be, I went into a village and we had to take this point. And in the process of this point, there was a 13-year-old enemy combatant. Yes, this is a real thing that happens overseas that the media will not tell you about. I will tell you it happens. 13-year-old enemy combatant. He was about to shoot at one of my squad. We had to take him out. And then turns out that this guy who takes him out, maybe he's got a 13-year-old son at home. And now he's playing this game in his head of, that could have been my son. That could have been my son. It wasn't your son, and your son's not carrying an AK-47 fighting some stupid war for an enemy. So we got to break that down. It's BS. And if we can get it to break down, that's half the battle. The other half of the battle is you as the patient have to buy into it, right? How do I get you to do that? This is where there's a couple of different options. Because if your brain, give me a second here, I'm going to use some props. So if this is the trauma, right? This is the trauma, and this is the cognition that you put to it. Okay, so now they're kind of glued up there in your mind, and your therapist is like trying to break that apart for you. But it keeps wanting to stick. The therapist is trying to help you break it down. But then let's say they do, and let's say we can break it apart enough, and we say, okay, what really happened there? What would you like to think about it instead, or what's the truth? And they may say, I did the best that I could, but this wasn't preventable. We're going to try to put that in there with that memory and get this one to fade away. Okay. If we can do that, your brain's going to probably get it to adaptive resolution, and it's going to file it, and it's going to start, your symptoms are probably going to start to fade away. But Sarge, you say, I've been thinking like this for 20 years. Yeah, it's going to be hard, but I promise you it doesn't take 20 years to undo that. It doesn't even take 20 months in most cases for most of my patients. Most of my patients is a year or less. Sometimes we get really lucky and it's less than a couple months. I can't tell you why. We're all wired different. There's things that can help you along the path. If you're not a big drinker, obviously that's going to help you because your brain's a little bit more healthy, if you will. So that helps. If you are somebody who was probably prone to being able to think, say positively, or at least kind of be open with your thoughts of like entertaining different scenarios, that might be a factor that might help, right? But even in the cases where somebody's like doesn't have those pre-existing traits that they're bringing to it, typically I can get them feeling a lot better within a year or less. That's pretty typical. There are cases where it does take longer, and I wish that wasn't so. But I can tell you my experience with the people that I've worked with, soldiers, firefighters, police officers, EMT, paramedics, corrections officers, dispatch sometimes. It's a pretty small percentage that takes longer than a year for me. How do we get the new thought to pair with the new cognition to pair with the trauma memory? We got to form new neural pathways, and this is where the treatment has really become amazing and revolutionary in the last 25 or so years. So the technique, the modality that is my preference that I use the most is EMDR. Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Again, I can't spend a whole semester explaining all this stuff, but the short version of it is by stimulating both hemispheres of the brain. Watch my hands for a second now. So, okay, with the signal, right? And it's not electrodes or anything like that. We do it with either like eye movement, or you can do it like this, or sometimes it's a light bar where the person has to follow the light back and forth like that. Or sometimes it's like earbuds with sounds going back and forth like that. Or sometimes it's hand buzzers that they're holding and this one buzzes and then the other buzzes. Any of those techniques will work. What it's doing is it's sending the signal in the brain like that, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And there's a tremendous amount of energy and electricity that's going on there that does a few things. We've studied this with MRIs, does a few things that, number one, it allows me to help you access your subconscious. Why are you thinking about this in the way that you do? What other memories is it connected to? And I can also, with that stimulation, we can desensitize to it so that what might seem like a 10 to remember, to think about that memory. If you tell me I had to do CPR on an infant and I have an infant at home and all I could think about was this could be my baby, then we can desensitize. Sorry, I dissociated there for a second just thinking about that. We can... Give me a second. We can desensitize to that memory in that image. Okay. And if what you saw there is that's like a minor dissociation, you just kind of like phase out for a second. Right. And there's more severe versions of that where a person can like totally blank out. What happened for me there is I was thinking about like my little godson just for a second, thinking about like, what if I ever had to do CPR on him or something like that? And that's a dissociation. It's part of trauma. So we can desensitize to it. So instead of it being like a 10 on like how much it affects us, maybe we get it down to a 3 or 2. Maybe we get it down to a 1. So like I can look at it and I can say, yeah, that was a crappy day. I wish it never happened, but it's a bad memory and it's in the past and I don't have to hold on to that anymore. Okay. We can, and more importantly, and this is where the magic happens. And man, as a therapist, this is my drug. There is nothing greater for a therapist than when we see the change happen. And you can literally physically see it on their face. Their face changes. It lightens up. They release. It's almost like weight. They're releasing weight. But what we're doing is with that bilateral stimulation, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, the brain is like prone to form new neural pathways there because there's so much electricity in the brain happening at that moment. And so we can say, okay, new thought with that memory. That wasn't my fault. I did the best that I could. It's a really crappy thing that happened, but I couldn't prevent it. And sometimes bad stuff's going to happen. Even though I try my best, sometimes bad things are going to happen. So when that happens, if the brain takes it and they stay stuck together, it's going to go to that adaptive resolution. And it's probably going to bring my symptoms way, way down. Okay, so EMDR is the modality that I use most often. I'm also trained in two other modalities, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive processing therapy. I'm not going to get too much into those two other than to say, again, the way that it works is actually very similar, not the technique, but the idea that we got to break down this old thought and we got to form a new thought that connects with it, one that helps it get to adaptive resolution. But Sarge, you say, what about psychedelics? We're getting there. Let's go over to chat again. All right. You don't rise to your level of expiration. You rise to your level of training. Yes, that is true. what is the line between post-traumatic stress that affects you, and what's the line between just having post-traumatic stress that affects you and PTSD? If I'm understanding the question correctly, the difference between like PTSD and other types of trauma diagnoses has to do with the number of symptoms, the severity of symptoms, and and how long it's been going on, right? So if you really want to dig deep into this, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual is what all therapists use here in the United States. I believe in Europe they use something similar, but it's designed by the American Psychological Association. It's based on MRI and years of research. And so there's very, very specific criteria that a person has to meet to be considered that they have PTSD. If they don't have PTSD, maybe they have acute stress disorder. Maybe they have other trauma. That's literally another diagnosis: other trauma and stressor-related disorder. So there's a handful of them, but you can get some of the symptoms, all of the symptoms, or if you're very lucky, none of the symptoms. Survivor syndrome can be related to it, where you lived through a situation, but somebody that was with you did not. And I would say that it's very closely connected. That it is in fact trauma, and that the cognitive stuck point in those cases has to do with, why did I make it through this and my battle buddy didn't? Okay. um, that's my best interpretation of that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We know that they can make weapons in prison. We know this. Yeah. Wow. Yes, I'm glad you said that. So here's the thing. There's something about when you go see a therapist, that because it's an objective person that you're not really emotionally connected to. It's not a family member. It's not a friend. That opens up different avenues for you to kind of explore this stuff. I'm not saying don't talk to your friends and family. Absolutely, you should. Absolutely. But if that's not getting you where you need to be, it might be time to connect with a therapist, because there is something different about going in and talking to somebody that has no connection to your life outside of that room, that frees you up to explore all kinds of things, right? I hear the best secrets in the world, and I can't share them with you. We are bound by our oath and by our ethics. There's nothing that a person can say to a therapist, especially if they've been in the field as long as I have, that we haven't already heard. I have heard about the weirdest sexual fetishes. I've heard about murders. I've heard about where dead bodies are hidden. I've heard about anything you can possibly imagine, about fantasies about hurting other people, anything that you can imagine. And For the most part, we have to keep that stuff secret. There are a few situations where we can break confidentiality if somebody's truly in danger and things like that. But let's not dive too far down that rabbit hole today. The easiest way to explain that is your therapist should not be sharing your information unless there's a really, really good reason, like an emergency, somebody's in danger kind of situation. And especially if it's kids, like, when we're upfront about that, when you come to see me, I'm going to tell you in that very first half hour of talking to me, one of the first things I'm going to tell you is, if you tell me about a child being abused, I have to report it. I lose my license if I don't handle this correctly. I have to report it. And that is every therapist in the United States that is licensed. So there are some stuff that we can't keep confidential. If you tell me about an elderly person being abused, I have to report that. And by the way, therapists are not the only mandated reporters. Teachers are too. So yeah, there's laws regarding certain professions to protect very, very vulnerable people. They're there for a reason, and that trumps over confidentiality every time. Let's see. So I want to make sure I didn't miss one of your questions here. Okay, so dissociation, like we were talking about before, in my opinion, everybody dissociates to some extent. Most of us, it's a little one like you saw me do earlier, where I just kind of like that thought got in my head and I just kind of like phased out for a second. Very, very normal. It's a defense mechanism your body has to protect you from pain and try to manage it, and hard to get into it. In a way, it's an escape too, but also it can force you to look at something again because you don't want to. Not because you don't want to. It can force you to look at something again because it's not getting to that adaptive resolution. That's what I was trying to say there. And a really severe ones can be dangerous. If somebody has a really severe dissociation, it's a flashback. And we don't use that term too much in the field. I use it here because most people that aren't mental health will know what I say when I say flashback. But in the field, we don't really call it that much anymore. We're typically going to say dissociation. And in a really extreme one, you're going to be fully immersed in that memory. You are going to see, smell, and hear things as if you are back in that moment. And it can be very, very dangerous, especially if combat is involved or a person was driving or something like that. So that's for me when I'm working with somebody, that's a high priority. I got to get those under control with you. We got to work on this. We got to give you some skills to get those under control. Car wrecks can do it. Yep. Well, and this is a big thing, is the suck it up culture really is a disservice to people, right? So, and this has been a problem with not just with the military, but with first responders up until very, very recently. It started to get a lot better, where we're starting to encourage people to take that, like, it's okay to be depressed. It's okay to have anxiety. It's okay to have anger management issues. It's okay to have trauma, but you got to work on it, right? So that's a kind of a new thing where, and still I'm not going to lie to you, some people are still behind the curve on this when it comes to some of the first responder departments, and they still have that suck it up buttercup culture. All you're doing is burning out your staff, and you're creating a liability that if you don't make them feel like it's okay to go get help and they're not going to lose their job for going to get help, then they're just going to keep compiling it. They're going to keep building on it, and they may develop substance abuse on top of it. And then one day they might snap, and you're going to have a situation like you had with Chauvin choking out George Floyd on the ground. Now, I don't know if he had PTSD. I've never talked to him. I would like to. I would love to be his therapist and be like, what the heck happened here? How did you get to this point where you're watching somebody choke out and die and you don't move, right? I have my thoughts on what it could be, but because I've never spoken to him, I don't know. But that's what can happen if you don't deal with it. You could get to a point where you do something really bad, or you drive your family away from you because they're afraid of you, or you lose your job because you keep losing your temper, or you lose your license because you keep road raging like an idiot, or you kill your liver because you keep poisoning it trying to cover up the symptoms. All of these things are potential consequences if you don't deal with the trauma. So people have started to recognize that we can't just say suck it up buttercup, because that's BS. We have to normalize that when you're exposed to extreme horrible things, and our first responders and our soldiers are exposed to extreme horrible things, that it is very, very normal for them at some point to pick up some symptoms, and that it is very, very normal for them to go get help, and they don't have to give up their job, and they don't have to lose their wife, and they don't have to snap and hurt somebody. But you got to make it normal. You got to normalize it and stop this suck it up buttercup culture. And like I said, most of the people around here that I interact with have done a very, very good job of recognizing that mental health does matter. Mental health matters for the first responder community, and we have some awesome support systems here in my area. I am just one piece of a very large, very awesome puzzle, and I am not any way related to how this all got started here. There was big players who are still active in this community who I know, who I'm involved with, who I love and respect for getting this all started. Without going down too much of this rabbit hole, if those of you who are familiar with the Super Sofa Store fire here in my city, that's really what got it started. We lost 9 firefighters in one night to a horrible fire. And that's what got that's what started to break this this culture of we don't go to therapy, and we make it accessible because we got a lot of people that now need help. Um, so sometimes, unfortunately, it does take a tragedy to move that system. But that's what it was. It was before I moved here. I wasn't involved with it. I'm thankful to the people who came before me, who set this up and made. We have an amazing system here. We really do. Like, if you're a first responder in my city, you have so many good supports available to you, and your senior officers and your chiefs and your captains should be making you aware of those. And there's peer support available to you too, and you should be aware of those things. If you're not, get on Google. All right, get on Google, and you can find us. We're out there. We're not hiding. Um, yeah, let me. My security, I never witnessed, so I didn't give up any secrets. So I am. So let me just touch on Lee's comment here. I am. I've worked with people who've told me about stuff that's happened overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan that's classified, and I've heard some really sad stories, and it will never be told in the American media, and I will never share it myself. That's why we need to normalize therapy access to soldiers as well. You can come in, and for the most part, again, I told you the exceptions above. For the most part, it's going to stay in that realm, right? Your therapist might staff it with their supervisor, but that's part of their team, or they might staff it with the doctor, but that's part of that team. Okay. Are there people wired to not have PTSD? So that's a great question, Steve, and it's hard to say. Like yes. So in a way, yes. There are many people who will go through a 30-year career in first responder world, or do 4 tours of duty in a combat area and not necessarily pick up any severe symptoms. Um, it's I don't know that it's so much like that they have the DNA that's makes them more resilient, as it just didn't happen. Everything they saw just didn't happen to connect with them on a personal level. So at the beginning of the stream, I was talking about like your previous experiences and your core beliefs and your values and your ethics have a lot to do with this, right? So it's not always like a person is had a bad childhood. It can also be like things that were raised in your family where there were high values, and then those values get assaulted by what you witnessed. That can do it as well. So I don't know that there's anyone that's got their DNA is more resilient to it. I think it more has to do with your personal stuff and how you connect to scenes. And you might just get really lucky and make it 30 years where every scene that you went to didn't connect to you personally. That does happen. Yeah, be careful with the liver. Liver damage is bad, guys. Don't go easy on it. And I get it. In my younger days, I drank a lot more. I hardly drink at all now. But in my younger days, I drank too much, and I assume my liver's okay. I haven't had any problems yet. But I know that I wish I hadn't done that. I really do. I think that there was times where I probably thought I was being funny to people, and they're like, "Oh God, this guy's annoying me." That's things like that. Soldier Heart, it was known and recognized at least by the American Civil War. Hey, Penteki, it's good to see you. Appreciate you. Thanks for coming in. All right, so psychedelics. We said we were going to come back to that, and I know I'm going a little bit long, so I'm gonna start to speed this up just a little bit. I do not work with either ketamine or psilocybin. I'm not opposed to them. It's just that I'm not involved with that right now. Maybe later in my career I would. I can tell you what I know. The research that I've read and the people that I've spoken to have had really good results with it. It's very promising. And the reason why I think that it works is because of that same thing that we're doing with EMDR. Remember, I showed you the pen analogy here, right? Take my pens here for a second again. So we'll say that middle one is the trauma. This one's the thought that I put with that trauma, and this is the new thought that we want to add and to replace that old thought. Okay, so same thing, right? With EMDR, I'm kind of getting this one to separate, and we're putting that new one in. Well, you can really do the same thing with psychedelics, is that you're, instead of doing the brain stimulation back and forth, you're lighting up the brain in new ways with psychedelics. So you're creating opportunities for new neural pathways where you can attach a new thought with that old memory. So does it work for a lot of people? Yes. Does it work for everyone? I don't think so. I've heard a couple bad stories where people had bad experiences with it, but overwhelmingly, most of the people that I've talked to and most of the research that I've read was pretty positive. What I would say is, if you're going to do something like that, do not go to like one of these like backwoods places where, they're going to give you ketamine in somebody's wood shack. No, not safe, not safe. Go to a clinic, a medical clinic, where they have a license to do this. And a lot of times they're doing research. Sometimes you can get it discounted or for free if you sign up to be part of the research study. But please, please, please don't get it off the street or from somebody who claims to be some magical shaman out in the woods. Every time I've heard horror stories, it was one of those types of experiences where there was somebody who's not doing it in a medical setting. Okay, so if you go to a medical clinic setting, there's going to be like dosage is going to be right. And then there's going to have the nursing staff on hand. There's going to be therapists there to work with. Real therapists, not like these people who claim that they're therapists, but they're really just like an internet shaman. I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. I'm telling you, these are the experiences that I've heard about that were not good. Okay. Yeah, that could be a trigger. Pennsylvania preparedness, from hearing it so many times that you associate the emergency with the sounds. Absolutely. The sirens can do it. Nicotine withdrawal does suck. Yeah, it really does. Stay with it, man. Lots of water. Help to flush out those toxins as quick as you can. All right. Again, if you're getting any value out of this, please consider giving me a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you're just tuning in right now, I have some resources in the description below. Real quick, I've got a course on managing your fight, flight, freeze response. Check that out. The link is for that is in the description below. 3 books on this subject that I recommend, and links to 2 channels that I'm going to be partnering up with this week to talk about mental health. All right. One trick I want to teach people tonight that you can use for yourself if you're experiencing flashbacks, or you can teach somebody else if they're having flashbacks. This is not a cure. This is like first aid. Okay. So it's like, you need surgery, but I can at least stop the bleed. Okay. So this is called sensory grounding. And what you do with this is, if you're having a flashback, or somebody is having a flashback, you can teach them this. Have them wherever they are. As soon as they start to feel it, as soon as they start to notice it, look around wherever they are. What are 5 things they see? Right. So I might look around my room and I might say, I see my lights, my microphone, my laptop, my pens, my phone. 4 things they hear. Well, I can hear my wife baking in the other room. I hear her mixer running. I can hear my air conditioning. Hear my water bottle. And that might be all I can get. Maybe I don't get 4. So then you move on to the next thing. 3 things I physically feel, not emotionally, physically feel. I recommend that one of those be something that you're always carrying with you, something from your EDC. For me, it's my wedding ring. So that's going to be my first one. And then I'm going to maybe think about the chair that I'm sitting on or the shoes on my feet. All right. 3 things I physically feel. Next one's going to be 2 things that you smell. I'm not sure, but my wife might have made some coffee, or it could be like something that smells like that she's baking. That's all I got. So I'm going to go on to the last thing. One thing I taste. Right now, all I'm getting is my water. So when you force your brain to focus on those sensory things, it grounds you back in the mindfulness of the moment, right? It says to your brain, oh, no. We are not in combat in Afghanistan right now. We are sitting at home in the living room, and my wife is baking something, and I'm on a live stream, and this is what I'm doing. Your brain can't sustain both images. It has to choose, And when you're forcing it to focus on the sensory stuff that's right in front of you, that's the choice that it's going to focus in on. This is a very effective technique. And it can help with panic attacks too. I've had some of my patients use this with panic attacks as well. But specifically, it's really good with flashbacks. So remember that. And again, it's not a cure. All it does is kind of like get you out of that moment so that you can get some more help. Okay. Things to avoid. Oh, hey, Bacon's good to see you. Yeah, the yes, you got to go check out the pen analogy. All right, just making sure I didn't miss anything there. Things to avoid. Okay. Be careful with the alcohol. You know, alcohol is often the number one choice for people with trauma symptoms. It's not the only one, believe me, but it's often the number one choice for people with trauma symptoms because it's pretty effective at helping you get to sleep. It's pretty effective at numbing out some emotional pain, but there's huge consequences to it. So be careful with it. I'm not saying don't drink. Believe me, I like a beer with my steak. Occasionally I'll have a little couple sips of bourbon too, right? So I'm not saying don't drink. Definitely enjoy yourself, but be careful with it. With trauma, it's easy to go too much. It's very easy to overdo it. And the next one's going to be unpopular by a lot of people who watch this video, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'm not a fan of benzodiazepine use with trauma. Yes, it's going to help you feel better, but what I've seen over and over and over again, especially with my combat veterans, is that it doesn't work effectively after a very short period of time, and you need more and more and more of it to get the effect. And then if you can't get it because your doctor says you're maxed out and you used up your prescription before the month was out, so you're screwed, I can't give you any more, you're going to go through some awful withdrawal. Like from what I've heard, it's worse than heroin. It's bad. You do not want that. And also, I think it's going to make it harder to deal with some of these things when you do eventually dig into them in therapy. So I'm personally, now I know there's going to be a ton of people who disagree with this and downvote me just for saying it. I'm giving you my professional opinion. You can flush it down the toilet. I had to say it, but I am not a fan of benzodiazepines for trauma therapy. And if you don't know what that is, that's like Xanax and Valium and those kind of deals. If you absolutely do have to have it, like I can't function without this, try to go to as low of a dose as you and your doctor can get you to. Minimize the dependence that you have on that to function, right? Like get it as low as you possibly can and the weakest version of it that you can possibly get if you have to use them. Okay. Again, I got some books and resources for you down below. Let me check chat one more time. And then I'm going to go ahead and give you my final thoughts. Okay. And this is, if you weren't aware, this is PTSD Awareness Month. And it is also Men's Health Awareness Month, right? So let's get this message out there. If you want to share this one to somebody that you know could benefit from it, I appreciate that. Hopefully this reaches a few people that it's helpful for, okay? Let's check chat one more time, and then I'm going to give you my closing thoughts. Yeah, drinking your way to sleep is I mean, yeah, it'll get you there but there's a big consequence to it, and the more you do it, the worse that's going to get. I don't know much about lithium salts. Lithium as a medication is sometimes used with bipolar disorder. And I will tell you, it's kind of one of the older ones, and tend to be a lot of side effects with lithium, but it is very effective for regulating moods. It's maybe more effective, in my opinion, than some of the newer ones, but a lot of people don't like the side effects, and I get that. Going to Arby's to help. I don't know about that, but Arby's has some good stuff. You need to get the blood test. Oh yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you for saying that. Coffee first. If you do take lithium, you're supposed to have regular blood work because the levels have to be maintained at a certain level. All right, I don't think I missed any questions. If I did, I apologize. I want to go to my closing message right now. And this one specifically is for my first responders out there who might be watching this. And I'm going to put my veterans in here too. We exist right now in a time where it's socially very hard to be a first responder. because there was a few bad apples that made people get twisted in their mind to think things like cops are bad or cops are the enemy. And I know that that's really hard to have so much social media say crap like that. And I know that it's hard when people think that they don't have to give you respect because of this weird culture that we're in right now. What I want you to know is a couple things. You are loved and you are appreciated by the silent majority. And there's a lot of loudmouths out there that are going to, on the internet and everywhere else, that make you think that they're the majority, but I promise you they are not. And there are many of us who push back against them and say, you're an idiot. You know, like if you think all cops are bad, then don't call them when somebody's breaking into your house or somebody breaks into your car, right? You know, don't be a hypocrite. These people are out there putting their lives on the line to protect your community. Stop being stupid, right? So you are loved, you are appreciated by the silent majority. And some of us in that majority are not so silent too. You just might not always see it. So remember that. And you have allies. And this weird dynamic that we're in is not going to last forever. Okay. It came about because of a couple of really bad tragedies, because we had a couple of bad apples. And it got generalized in a way that is equivalent to, whenever you group a whole bunch of people based on the actions of a few, that's a bias, that's a prejudice, and that's what's happening. So if you know that there's a couple bad apples out there that did some terrible things, and you generalize it and say all cops are bad, well, then you're just as guilty of having that hatred in your heart towards a large group of people without even knowing them. And you don't, and by the way, you don't know what you're talking about because it's not true. So to my officers out there, to my firefighters out there, because believe me, you may not realize it, but they're giving crap to the firefighters and they're giving crap to the EMTs, and they've always given crap to the corrections officers, and dispatches getting it too, and soldiers even. I've seen people talk crap about soldiers, saying terrible, terrible things about our soldiers. They're just loud, they're noisy people, and and they're distorted with their hatred. They're distorted and have overgeneralized, and been allowed to have this voice, which never should have gotten to this point. But I promise you, this isn't going to last forever. Okay, so you're loved, you're respected. Remember that, and you're appreciated. Again, please check out my course if you guys want more information on managing your fight, flight, freeze response. I got links down below for 3 books that I highly recommend. And I've got an upcoming stream on Tuesday night at Pistol Packing Pilots channel. We're going to be talking about mental health for pilots. Very, very important topic. That's going to be 9 p.m. on Tuesday on his channel. And then next Saturday, we've got Coffee First here in the chat. I'm going to be on her channel on Saturday at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking about a lot of this same stuff, anxiety and trauma. Okay. So if you're looking for more on this, please check out those 2 streams as well. Last, let me check your chat one more time here, and I'm going to call it a night. And somebody needs to do an Arby's run for us because we're all getting hungry now. 100% Coffee First. They're a bad therapist. I will tell you, and I'm not just talking about like they're not good at their job. People, I know therapists that have done crap that they should not have done, right? Like a big no-no in my field is you do not date your patients, ever. That is a no-no. That is the quickest way to lose your license. It is the quickest way to lose the respect of your peers. You never, ever date your patients. Even if it's years later, you do not do it. And I know people who broke that rule. And they screwed themselves with it. So yes, there are bad in every profession. Yeah, loudmouths on the internet. Exactly. Yep. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you for real. Just seeing if I missed anything else. Yeah, there's Coffee First. It's also in the description down below. Definitely check that out. One more thing. I'm so sorry. Next Friday, I won't be live. We have family visiting. And I've got a lot going on that day with my primary job that I can't get into here, but it's going to be a very, very busy day. I will not be live next Friday, but again, you're going to see me on 2 lives this week on other channels. So just meet me over there. I'll release something on Friday, whether it be a short or a long video. I don't know, but I will not be live next Friday. All right. That's it. Y'all have a great weekend. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying with me. I appreciate you all more than you know. Keep planting your seeds. Keep stacking your silver. This is Prepping with Sarge.